If needlework is your passion, whether you're stitching by hand, machine, or mixing it all up, you're going to want to hear about the Mr. X Stitch Contemporary Needlework Prize 2025. This prize celebrates the best in modern stitch, and it's open to creatives from all around the world, whether you're a student or an emerging artist or a seasoned professional. And the best part, you don't have to send your work anywhere. Just upload high-resolution images to a private folder we will send you after you enter. You can enter more than one category, for instance, hand embroidery and 3D textiles. Just grab an entry for each one. And if you've got a student ID, you can get 50% off the entry price as well. The deadline for entering is 30th of June 2025, and entries are now open at xstitchmag.com/prize-entry. Thanks to our brilliant sponsors, Bookmarked Hub by Search Press and David and Charles, and the legends at Lowry Workstands. If you've got the stitch bug, this is your time. Show us what you've got. Enter the prize now. Visit xstitchmag.com/prize-entry to get your ticket today. Julie Heaton is a UK-based machine embroidery artist whose work explores her experiences following the death of her husband in 2009. Her work's beautiful, and in this second part of our interview we talk about the time she spent making a portrait of her father, and then the experiences she had doing a master's at the Royal College of Art, something that really helped her get to a point of honest reflection. It's really interesting with Julie that she's been through this great tragedy that we talked about in the previous episode, and now her work has been this kind of therapeutic process, this way of, you know, her husband has been her muse and has inspired her work, and the work that she did at the RCA marks a new chapter in which she's able to talk overtly about her internal dialogue. I really enjoy talking to Julie. Not only is her work technically amazing, but for someone to be so intimately connected to such a powerful event in their life, it was an honour to talk about the work with her. I think both of these episodes, like, I'm recording these intros having not long spoken to her, and I think I'm still feeling the poignancy of it all. Good things can come from bad situations, and I think that's a takeaway that we can take from listening to Julie. You know, she went through something horrendous. Her children lost their father, but I think she recognises that despite all of that, there have been some positive outcomes, and that life is beautiful. But unfortunately, sometimes it takes really hard things for us to realise that. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to this episode. Do, if you can, listen to the first episode first and then this one. And obviously there are plenty more episodes. If you like Julie's kind of work, then listening to the episode with Meredith Woolnough would also be worthwhile. If you do like the show, feel free to ping me a message on Instagram and tell me that you're listening. That'd be great. I'll be back next week with an interview with a different artist. So until then, enjoy the show. So let's go back then. So you did a City and Guilds 2008 textiles from the start. Was textiles always a thing for you? Like, if you go back to your childhood?
Yes, I think it was. I remember my mum used to, we never had any money when we were children. And my dad would have two jobs in a drawer on the side to sort of save money for holidays and things. And if we wanted any new clothes, quite often, things weren't passed down to me quite so much because I was the oldest, but my mum was really good. There would be pictures of clothes in a catalogue, as you had in those days, and she would buy the fabric, and she would, because I asked her this recently, I said, did you have a pattern for the clothes to make? She said, no, I didn't have a pattern. She would just work it out from dresses that we had, and she would adapt them to be, you know, and she'd make these outfits, were just like the ones in the picture. So I think, whereas my mum didn't have the patience to teach me to knit, and she didn't necessarily teach me to sew, but I was quite amazed by how she could transform this fabric into these outfits. So I always liked textiles, but I always liked drawing as well. I just used to draw all the time when I was a child, always drawing Disney characters, particularly liked drawing. It was just whereas people would play with dollies and things, I would just be just be drawing crayons and paper.
Right.
And so obviously then I developed to love using my own sewing machine and making clothes, as my mum had. And I think that's where and I'm always able to try and think new things. When I started the City and Guilds felt making course, a friend of mine had decided she would have a party for people and we'd all make a very small sample of felt. I'd never heard of felt making before that. So I went along, made this really small piece of felt, fell in love with the process, and then thought I'd do a course in City and Guilds in felt making. But by doing that course, I didn't really know. I knew I wanted to do more art. I was working for the NHS, and there wasn't a lot of time because we were a family and it was really busy. And that was one thing a bit sad. Carl had said if I was going to do any art courses, they had to be bottom of the list of priorities.
Okay.
So anyway, I think I sort of knew that really. And I did the City and Guilds course and absolutely loved it. And then when I was there, I thought, oh, I fancy doing a foundation course, and maybe I can do it. Maybe I could possibly even do a degree. So I guess by being on one course, word of mouth, and I heard about the course in Bristol. Then I went to Bristol, and then whilst I was there, it was during that course that Carl died. But during it, Carl and I'd also had a conversation about me doing a BA. And I guess when I was on my BA and I got challenged about drawing, that was why I turned to my sewing machine, because it was my comfort blanket, really, my tool from my childhood. I remember my mum making the clothes, and I'd love dressmaking, and just that sound of the sewing machine. So that's why I started using it.
Do you think actually, if I want to send you to sleep of an evening, could I just play the sound of a sewing machine? Do you think you might like drift off to it? It's like your whale noises or something.
I know. Well, I think it might be right for my son, because I hadn't been stitching for a while after doing and my son came down and I had the sewing machine going. And he said, "Oh, the sewing machine! I can hear your sewing machine from upstairs." So I think my boys love it as well. You know, the sound of the sewing machine.
And it's clear that the machine, because that's the interesting thing. I was reflecting on your work because you started out and there were quite a few objects, like you say, with the car engine and the chocolate bar, but then moving into doing work that involves people. Because it's one thing to capture like realism of an object, but to then try and capture the essence of a human, which I think is what you have to do when you get into portraiture, isn't it? That's the leap, right?
It is, yeah. It is, yes. That is it. And I don't know if you've seen the picture of my dad.
Amazing.
Because we had a really difficult relationship after my husband died, after Carl died, because my dad was just old school and decided he was so cross that Carl could do that to us. But of course that isn't the case. We couldn't make him understand that. So he would never talk about Carl and wouldn't mention, his name. And so my relationship with him was quite difficult, but I did manage. But my boys carried on seeing him, and they had a really good relationship with him. And then then sadly he was older and he was diagnosed with cancer and he became ill. And we did start to build up a bit more relationship like it had been when I was a child, but it was still a bit challenging in the beginning. But anyway, as we carried on, I realized the value. His relationship with my boys was just that after their dad, my dad was their kind of really significant person in their life. So when he was ill, I just said, "Dad, can I take a photograph of you?" And anyway, so I did lots of different pictures, but this one I captured it as he was looking up at my son, and there was just this twinkle in his eye, and I just knew that was the drawing that I wanted to sort of make of him. But then we had the joke. This is about, I made this drawing, Jad, and one day, you never know, maybe I can enter the National Portrait Gallery, a competition for portraiture. So anyway, but that was just a bit of a standing joke with my dad, and I don't know if he really took that on board. But anyway, I carried on and I made this piece of, it was just really, really, really hard to make, actually. I did find, because being a bit tearful when you're making and using water-soluble fabric.
There's a risk. Okay.
There's a risk. Yeah, so some days I could do it, and other days I'd have to leave it. But I was really invested in making that piece emotionally. But that gets me on to the subject of the National Portrait Gallery. They didn't have the competition for a few years. They were closed. they've now opened again. I was so excited to see that they'd launched a competition, but it's only for portraits made with paint. So you can't have an embroidered portrait unless you have got some paint somewhere in the portrait. So so I just think, when you said about capturing the essence of a person in portraiture, but I think, well, it was shocking that they didn't value that you could do that in stitch. As far as they're concerned, it can only be done in oil or acrylics and on board. So it's a really interesting sort of quandary, when you're working with textiles at that sort of intensity and at that level, and it can still be undervalued.
Forgive me for using foul language, but it's bullshit, isn't it?
I was so cross about it, and I contacted them, and I got a very sympathetic response saying that we would pass on your feedback to, the competitions team. And then I replied to that, and I haven't heard anything back. I felt so cross about it. And there's a few other textile artists on Instagram as well who'd had a similar sort of, I think they'd also had a conversation with the National Portrait Gallery. Yeah. But I just feel like it's quite unbelievable. But then that puts more fire. It's like being told not to draw. It just puts more fire in your belly to just keep making, this sort of work.
Yeah,
just 100%.
To. So let's just for, if anyone's listening right now, go to Julie Heaton, HEATON.com/dad. Go and do that on your phone now. We'll just wait here for a minute so you can get the picture up, because I want to ask you a couple of questions about it. One is, how big is the piece?
It's true to life, so it's the same size as my dad. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So okay. No small piece then.
No, it's a true to life. It's sort of because I think I took the photograph, and then I would enlarge the photograph by about 10%, and then I'll print it out and trace over the outline of it, just so I get everything in place. Because I think when you're on the sewing machine, you can only see in my 20 centimetre hoop. But of course, that doesn't mean to say that outline stays, because that outline dissolves, that outline distorts as you're sewing it. So you're still constantly having to look at your photograph on the computer screen. And then I've got my sewing machine, which is not connected to my computer at all. Some people think it is, but it's all done freehand. And then you're just trying to draw and reproduce that image. But I got books out on portraiture, so I do look at how people work with oil paints and how they do portraiture and how they build it up in layers, lots of sort of greens and yellows at the base and moving through the different pigments that are in skin. So I work sort of through it with a similar sort of process that people do when they're painting. But again, there's that jeopardy, if you can't, you might get one part right, but then if you get another part of it wrong, you sort of can ruin hours and hours and hours of work. So it is challenging. I can't just scrape it off and repaint it.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong, you've got to either carefully cut it out and redo it. So but it was a challenging piece to make, but I really needed to make that piece. I think that's what I find. These pieces are quite big, but normally they are really invested some time in thinking about them before I even start making them.
Yeah, and then diving into the subject matter when you're making them, because only when you're recreating something like that would you consider the contours of your father's forehead lines and the fact that they show that he's raised his eyebrows a lot, because rather than having like frown lines, and you dive into those things. I'd imagine you dwell on those intricacies as you go along.
Oh, I do, and especially his lips. He had these really thin sort of lips, and I remember just getting that and trying to just tweak it, and then it would just be sometimes just a case of a couple of stitches just need to be put at the end of the lips or sort of underneath. And I remember coming down and my boys coming down, and I said, look, and they said, that's Grandpa's smile. And they said, you just got his mouth. He said, it's just and so recreate it just feels quite magical still when you recreate it in stitch, because sometimes it's just, like I said, just the odd stitch just put somewhere that just makes all the difference. So it is an exciting process.
And even the background,
and I think it's
as well. The background, there's a lot of background, and I think that's quite an interesting decision to make.
Yes, there is a lot of background, and the background is a completely different colour to what was in the photograph. So that took me a while to decide what to do with that, really. And I think at some point there is a change in the colour of the threads, which I know is there, but other people don't seem to notice it. So it took me a long time to decide just even what colour, that should be. So, and it surprised me sometimes a bit. It should be easy, yeah.
So I'm just looking at him now. He looks like such a cool granddad. He looks like such a good, because classic granddad when you get one.
Yeah, we keep thinking, I've called the piece Dad, but sometimes I say to my boys, maybe we should call it Grampy instead, because it is more about. But anyway, it's about him being my dad and being their Grampy, and I guess it's about the relationship that they have with him, but also my relationship with him. That we took the photograph and it was just the right thing to do. And that picture that drawing hasn't been anywhere. It was up in. When Hand in Lock were, after the Hand in Lock, they have a small exhibition at the barge at the Oxo Tower. So it went to that. But apart from that, it's just on my wall at home. So it's just ours.
Are you ever not tempted to just like maybe put a tiny blob of paint in like the top left corner of the background to technically make it worth going into the academy?
No, I wouldn't do that on principle. I would rather, just.
I appreciate that.
I wouldn't do it on principle. Yeah, I want them to appreciate, the value. I still can't quite believe that they don't appreciate, value textiles. But it's the same for a lot of places. The summer exhibition, there are. I mean, the year my piece, the car engine got in, Bristol 2-litre engine. It was Grayson Perry, and. How fortunate to be Grayson Perry. I mean, I just kept thinking the fact that he chose my piece of work, but I think, well, it was a stitched car engine. So it was so amazing the year that he was curating the show. And there still wasn't a massive amount, but there were a lot more textiles in it that year. But it's always something you're going around and you can count them, can't you? A piece of paper to count how many pieces are made with stitch. But I think it's also quite an exciting time for textile artists because I think we're challenging that now. So and like with Tracy Emin, she's amazing at champion. She uses whatever medium is right to say what she wants to say. So
I mean, I've had this conversation a few times. I still look forward to the times when textile artists are just considered an artist rather than just textile artists, but also when people become renowned because of their textile art, not they're renowned and then they use textiles, which I think is quite a common occurrence at the moment.
Yeah,
but we'll get there.
I think it's I think so as well.
So then you went on and you did your MA, and then that led to some much more experimentation. I feel like this is starting you off on a different kind of path. Are you still going to always be machine, but now you're like experimenting with other media at the same time?
Yeah, that's really interesting because when I went to the Royal College of Art, I was, again, it's that sort of jeopardy thinking, gosh, I've got an established practice. I'm going to go here and they're going to expect me to change it. But of course, that's why I went, because I wanted to change my practice. But what I discovered, what I really changed was the way I talked about what had happened to my family. So there was this one, so when I was making my stitch, I was alluding to what had happened through this way that I made. But when I got to the Royal College of Art, I suddenly found that I could actually start making work where I was talking about what had happened. So when I was challenged about my drawing practice, I went off and so I started again thinking, well, first of all, I thought, actually, gosh, I'm just going to fail here. But I didn't fail. I did pass the module. But we all, I just think imposter syndrome at the RCA, we all got there and we all felt the same. So that was quite reassuring that we all felt the same. So I started off on this drawing process, again, closing my eyes. But instead of using my same machine this time, I was using charcoal and paper and pencil. And it was Christmas again, and I've had lots of difficult things that have happened at Christmas, and I find it a really traumatic period of the year. So I was making drawings, and I realised that the marks were responding to how I was feeling inside. Sometimes the marks were heavy, sometimes they were sort of light, they were fast, they were angry, and there was such a connection to how I felt and the mark that was turning up on the paper. And at the Royal College of Art, I could have that conversation about it, about this connection between how I was feeling and the marks that were on the paper. And I just and then they were open to these conversations, so I just carried on exploring it. But again, it was a conversation mostly between me and my tutors. But then we had this exhibition in our first year. It was a gallery project, and I'd still carried on exploring this idea of making marks that responded to how I felt. And some of them, but I then also became really interested in, this was to do with my body, and my body was giving away how I felt. And you can hide how you feel with words. You can say you're fine, but maybe you're not. And you can smile when it's not necessarily such a good day, but your body just holds it all tight inside, and your body can be a bit altered in the way you carry it according to how you're feeling. And so I got really fascinated with the back, because I feel like this tension can be in the back. So I was making drawings where I was touching and feeling my body, but I also was making some sculptures as well that responded to the shape of backs. And I had one, and I called it, it was a little sculpture. It's made with chicken wire, and it was ginger coir, I think. So it was a natural product anyway. And I called this little sculpture of a back with the shoulders slumped and the head bent forward, "Why didn't I ask before you left?" And so I had this title, and it was like the first time I was actually talking about how I felt, these questions that I had that I'd been too embarrassed to say, or I just hadn't felt it was right. And then I had a conversation with my peers about the title. And then I had my drawings as where I was touching and feeling my body, and I gave those another title. I gave them, "I cannot feel, but I do." When just not sure just what's going on inside, and it's really hard to describe how you're feeling. And my peers were just quiet and so just a bit overwhelmed and so supportive. And yes, I think that's really, that's great. So this is the first time I'm actually using titles about how I felt in my work, and I'm going to show it to somebody. So then the tutors come in, and we all have to do a crit, and every piece of work they're so fantastic, the tutors there. I mean, it was the most, it was the textile department. It was such a privilege to be there and to tap into all these, the knowledge of these tutors and their support, but also they also tell you as well when it's not quite, they have a good way of telling you as well when it's not quite working or you need to change your approach. But anyway, so we start critiquing the work and how it's all hung, and how I'd placed this little sculpture on this plinth, and I really should be thinking about the plinth. And anyway, so the conversation's carrying on. And then one of my friends says, "Oh, Julie, maybe the tutors need to ask you what the title is." So with this room, so there's more people now, so it's everybody's on this module. I say the titles for work, and then it goes quiet.
Yeah.
Just for like 10 seconds, and then we continue, and then there's this amazing energy in the room as we pick up this conversation about the titles, and it's like the first time in my life I've felt in this safe, this place where I didn't realise that's what I was going to get when I went there, where I felt so safe and so supported, and you could really be honest and open. And that moment was pivotal then, because I then was trying to write my dissertation at the same time and struggling with my dissertation, because it was even though I've written one before, this particular one I was struggling with because I was trying to link my work to suicide and art and how it changed my views, and anyway, that moment became pivotal. And I talked about how I got to that point in my dissertation. How had I managed to find a way to talk about the unspeakable? How had I managed to find a way to do it in a room full of people who and some of them I knew well, but some of them I didn't know well. And I was really curious about that and how I'd got there. And that is how the Royal College of Art just continued. You know, there was always this way. I mean, and I didn't get, just because I was using really emotive work, that didn't give me an easy ticket through it.
Yeah.
It still challenged the way that I was making or how I might be approaching something. But it was again, I don't think I would have been at the Royal College of Art if I hadn't been making the work that responded to card dyeing. So my life has taken, it's taken on, it's completely been sort of transformed, good ways and bad ways, from what's happened. And going to the Royal College of Art was a privilege, and I really enjoyed it. It was hard work. It's really hard work.
Must be quite a profound moment for you to realise that you were able to communicate about that stuff. Like, that must have been quite the time.
It was, and to be making work that related to my body and showing that work and having conversations about it was just, I don't think I could quite believe it really, and quite sort of take it all in. And I feel like, you know, the work I was making, sort of touching, building my body, acknowledging that things happen to us, you know, different life events affect who we are. You know, we are a sum of, it's like somebody once described to me, like when somebody takes their own life, it's like a game of Jenga. Every time something good or bad happens, you know, you take a brick from the top and you put it at the top, and every time something good or bad happens, it still has an effect on who we are. And then sometimes that pile they just collapse and they just fall to the ground. So it is really, so the fact that I could work like this, could explore what happened to me, layer it all up, really think about how one piece of work was affecting the next layer, and then using print to print these drawings onto cloth. Again, a bit of jeopardy, not being a printer, not really knowing how it worked.
Yeah.
Using a process that was completely alien to me. So again, I guess a bit more jeopardy in that, so I'm using that process.
And that happened last year?
Yeah, I finished, yes, the summer of 23. Yeah, we graduated last year.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So where do you feel you're going next? Where do you feel the path is heading now?
Well, I think I still really enjoy stitch, and when I was at the RCA, I couldn't really quite work out how to incorporate my stitch into my practice. But so where I think I'm heading now is I think the brief for hand in lock just connects with what I was doing for the RCA. Whether or not I'll get the piece made in time for the hand in lock competition, I don't know. But it has inspired me to make a piece of work about my body and about my back, which was what I was doing there. So I'm just, I've had a photographer come over and I've taken some photographs. So I'm just exploring that idea at the moment. So I think I'm still carrying on working with stitch at the moment. I haven't shelved the idea of sort of working with print, because I think the processes I was using at the RCA could be really good for workshops. But what I am trying to do as well is get some embroidered workshops running, up and going, because I think I've spent sort of 12 or 13 years now learning about this process. I'm not an embroiderer. I wasn't trained in embroidery. I've just learned how to do it and found it's a really good tool for me. So I just want to share that passion as well with other people. So those are the two things I'm exploring at the moment: how to make a stitched piece of work that reflects my research at the RCA, and also how can I pass and share some of this love with other people as well. So I think those are the two things that I'm trying to concentrate on at the moment. But I am quite excited by the idea of making a piece of work that relates to my body and relates to everything that I was studying there.
It reminds me, I was trying to think of when you see, like, sometimes in, whether it's sitcoms or something, you know, the guy really likes the girl, but he's a bit nervous and he doesn't want to say the words at the time. So he goes and, like, hides in a room and says them to a plant pot or something. You wonder whether this RCA body of work is you saying stuff, but you're saying stuff in a context that's so different to your current work. But now you've said it, you've gone, right, I can do that. I can move forward on that. So now it gives you the opportunity to say it in the medium that you're generally used to. It's almost like a dry run.
And I think you summed it up so well saying that. And I think that's what happened at the Royal College of Art. It gave me the ability to, to find, a way to talk about things that are really unspeakable. And so it gave me that power and that strength to actually then start thinking about making a piece of work where I can have those conversations that I was too scared to have before. So that's why I think making a piece of work that relates to my body, again, something that's quite hard to do. I feel, showing your flesh in a piece of work that people are going to see. But I want it to be having a conversation. This piece of work is all about how the body keeps a score after trauma. So it's quite obvious. Beforehand, I was too scared to do that. So the RCA has been this amazing platform to give me that confidence, really.
Yeah. It's like such like a raw art thing, isn't it? You reflect back and it's nothing to do with actually the practice. It's to do with the story. Like that's what they're getting out of you in whatever form it comes.
Yes, exactly. And I'm still not really quite sure how that is going to manifest in Stitch at the moment. But I think that's why I went there, because I needed to challenge that. Like one of the tutors said, do you, just having an idea of a drawing and then just making it. Well, they were saying that, I think of all the pieces I've made, there's been really good reasons behind why I've made them, and a lot of them have taken a lot of time before I've actually got around to making the picture. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So I'm really curious as well to see what happens with this next piece of work, how I approach it.
Amazing.
So
they're so good. The thing is like your machine stitch stuff. Do you know Case Zavaye? You must know her work, I guess, because she's a fantastic portrait.
Yeah.
So the similarities. Obviously, she's hand embroidery and your machine embroidery, but your work's so much on a par with that. There's such. I wish there were more detailed shots of your work on your website so that you can really dig in and appreciate the intricacy of the stitches. Like that picture of your dad's amazing, but I kind of want to stare into his eyes. I want to see the depth of how his eyes are made, because otherwise you can't really get the gravity of it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, I think it's always my my son. I'm sure he goes, "Oh my gosh, Mum wants photographs." So they're always hidden somewhere on some hard drive, and I have to try and find them. But yeah, I think at the moment I'm trying to sort of start telling my story a bit more on Instagram. So I've been going back through some of my old photographs to find more photographs of the way I've been making. And I think I've got, especially the couple on the tube, I've got lots of close-ups there. So I could do, I'll look into putting those on my website, actually.
Because from a technical standpoint, it's just fascinating. As you said, you struggled with the realism, how you make realistic looking fabrics out of stitch without using the fabrics as well. And I think that's, you've kind of cracked it there. So you have a duty to share it to the world of machine embroidery.
And that's why I want to share it, but I also want to share it in workshops as well, because you know what, I used to teach at Art in Action, and there's something so magical about spending time with people where they come along for a day and they tap into what you've learned and you give them a day to explore your processes. So I think, and I think that's where Instagram's quite good as well, isn't it? Because you can put a lot of things on there. But I'm not very good at doing that, because I really think so carefully about what I say. I'm not very good at just putting an image up and just putting a few lines. Everything is more profound than that, so I have to really think about it. But I am really aware of sharing more of that information about what goes on behind my making.
And one thought I've just had, though, is actually I think you'd be a fantastic tutor, whether you're able to go down the route of helping people process things using stitch. Because the thing is you've been a midwife, and if ever there was a journey that people go on of birthing a project or birthing something, it's being a midwife. So you've got this inherent skill set of helping people go through painful journeys, which is quite an interesting reflection, I think.
Yeah, I know, and even if it's, I wouldn't want to be a therapist now, or I wouldn't want to go sort of down a route like that. But I am really interested to make work where people can just come along and just have a nice time. And if they do want to chat about things, it can be in a safe and in an environment that feels safe. And when we are using fabrics and threads and things that we're so familiar with, it does help us to have those conversations. And it's also just realizing that conversation is different for everybody, even if you've lost in the same way. How we approach it, what we need is all really different. But there's this connection with textiles. So it's just it's a wonderful medium that we're all part of. I do feel very fortunate.
Even at a basic level as well, just people making art, people expressing themselves if they've never done that before, that can be quite an uncomfortable thing. So just holding people's hands as they go through that is the very essence of it. I've done that teaching cross stitch. I've had people who've really struggled to get over themselves because they're doing cross stitch, and particularly if they're like a 30-year-old man or a 25-year-old man or whatever, but you hold their hands and you get through it and you give them theirs. And obviously an epidural is a bit of an extreme thing to do in an embroidery workshop, but at the same time, you're there with them on the journey. It's much more than just teaching stitching, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I think that's what's really good about how I've been challenged about my drawing and told that I shouldn't draw, and and that's a really good thing to take into these classes, to say, well, look, I was told I couldn't do it, and I just had to find a way, and I didn't know how to stitch. So, but I can obviously, sort of hold, I can get people going a little bit sooner than I did, because I can show them how I got started. But just this fact that I didn't know what was going to happen. So I does feel like it's open to everybody to explore. And you don't have to even necessarily produce a piece of work, just having a bit of go and understanding how something works. And maybe as well that sound of the sewing machine.
I think it'd be amazing. I can see you you'll be one of those people that does the workshops in the fancy locations, or goes and does workshops on cruise ships. I can see that. People are going to go on journeys with you. It'll be amazing.
Oh, I quite like the idea of doing one on the cruise ship. I would like to do more travelling.
Yeah, around the Bahamas or something. Do you have a favourite band?
Well, I think when I'm in my car and I'm driving, one of the first bands that I want to put on is Dire Straits.
Oh.
I really like that music. And I remember when I was a child, we didn't really listen to music much in the house. We would have Top of the Pops on a Sunday night and try and record it, but it wasn't a big thing, music. But then when I met Carl, I was introduced to the idea of going to concerts. And the first one we went to was a concert, was Dire Straits. I think it was it Brothers in Arms?
Right.
So I think that's when it was. I remember having the T-shirt, and so I still really, really love listening to that music.
Yeah, it's aged quite well, I think, hasn't it? Like Brothers in Arms as well, because I mean that was quite because it had that MTV song, and that was quite a seminal moment. It was like, when would that have been? Like 82, something like that, I think.
No, I think it's a bit later than. Yeah, I mean, I'm so bad at I remember music from when I might have been sort of listening to it, but I think I might be in early 90s, like 91 or 92.
Do you listen to music when you work?
Yeah, it varies what I listen to, actually. Sometimes I might have old black and white films on, because when I was living at home, when I was quite often stitching on a Saturday afternoon, my mum somebody would be watching TV and there would be an old film on. So I quite like that. Sometimes I listen to podcasts. When your sewing machine's going, you can't really hear an awful lot.
That is true, yeah.
So that's true, yeah. But then with music, I will just have 6 music on, or radio too, but when my boys are home as well. So it just sort of depends on what kind of mood I'm in. But I do really, I think, could live without the TV, but couldn't live without music.
I've actually started enjoying, and I've surprised myself here, listening to the BBC Sounds app, because they have quite a lot of mixes that kind of suit certain moods. Over Christmas, they had quite a lot of chilled Christmas type music that was a little bit alternative, and sometimes it was a bit choral, and sometimes it's a bit classical. But when you just want a mood kind of music, like I found that app to be particularly good for that, because the BBC's got so much stuff. Do you have a favourite podcast, Em?
Yeah, I do listen to podcasts as well. What was the series that? I used to listen to Grant Gibson's, Material Matters quite a lot. But I'd also listen to any podcast about Tracy Emin, especially when I was starting my work at the RCN, I was having a really sort of difficult. I would just listen to as much as I could, as many conversations that I could find online that were Tracy Emin. So I'd quite often be driving back home from London after being at the RCA, and I'd be listening to one of her, somebody interviewing her. So
is that a bit like if you've got to prepare for a football match, you kind of like watch people playing football to get in the zone? Are you like getting into the Tracy Emin vibe kind of?
Oh, I think, do you know what? I think I'm just fascinated by her, by how she just she's got no filter. She just talks about what she needs to talk about. But she also really cares about what people think about the work, even though it looks as if she doesn't care. She really, really does care. And she also really likes it as well if her work can help other people. And so I'm just being fascinated by her and some of the artists that inspired her to, that she liked back in her early years as well. And, Egon Schiele and Edvard Munch. And so I find it, when I was looking at my body and thinking about doing my back, I had a Egon Schiele book with his watercolours in and drawings of backs and things. So I really, so I'm a bit of, I will listen to anything that is to do with Tracy Emin. But I like podcasts, but sometimes there's so many out there. It's really hard trying to find ones to trying to find what you want to listen to, because there is so much. But I really love, especially when I'm driving. I like to have podcasts on.
Same. We've got an Egon Schiele poster up in our bedroom, actually, one of a portrait of his wife, or as I like to call it, Egon's Schiele. Which is my wife's a massive fan of him. I think he's really good. Yeah, it's a shame he died quite young, didn't he, Schiele? He didn't live past 35.
He from the influenza after the war. Yeah, so that was really sad, actually.
Do you have a favourite book?
Well, again, I thought long and hard about that, but then I started to think about. I've got a book downstairs called "The Body Keeps a Score" by. I can't remember his name. I can't pronounce it.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's so amazing. It talks about. Let me just see if I can find the book. I'm sure you can. I will find his name I've written it down so many times. The book just talks about how your body deals with traumatic events. And it was just an absolute fascinating read. And that was recommended to me by a counsellor, I think, at some point. And I've recommended it to other people. And I've read it so many times that my book has now fallen apart, and my book now keeps a score. So it's all wrapped in sellotape. Right. The cover's sellotaped together.
Yeah.
And it became my Bible, I think, when I was writing my dissertation. So, but
Cecil van der Kolk.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So it's really it was an invaluable piece of work, and especially there's a bit about the smoke detector, because my boys would say that I'd fly off the handle really quickly because you're on this fight or flight. You're hot wired for another disaster. So as soon as something goes wrong, you just go. You just go off like a smoke detector, and you you sense so. And then rather than looking at a situation, assessing it, and then deciding how you're going to react. And so, but this book would help me to understand that. And so the book has been invaluable. And I just constantly refer to it. And I think it featured throughout my dissertation.
Interesting.
And then there was
And then, do you have a favourite film?
Well, the first film that came to mind, I did try to think of lots of other things, like Manchester by the Sea I really like, but I couldn't help the fact that It's a Beautiful Life. Yeah, and I think I wrote an essay on that when I was doing my BA as well. So because even though it's obviously it's a hard one to watch in places, but the ending, when he realizes that it is a beautiful life and that there's so much to live for. So I just think it's a wonderful film, and not just for Christmas, just for any time of the year, really. But you have to be in the right. I can't always watch it. Sometimes it's a bit hard to watch it, but I think think that might have to be.
I've only seen
There's
that
sort of a
once.
theme running through
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
isn't
yeah.
there?
There is. But
Yeah.
life is beautiful, you know. And I think it's sometimes we don't. It's like that. What's the parable? So there's a man hanging off a cliff by a root of a plant, and beneath the cliff there is a tiger circling around, and he notices that a mouse is starting to chew through the root he's holding on to, and he sees a strawberry and he eats the strawberry, and it's the most beautiful thing he's ever tasted, you know. And that's what this whole thing's about, isn't it? We don't appreciate that life is beautiful in every way, shape or form, and unfortunately it takes big events to make us appreciate those things. But I guess that's the parable, isn't it? Really, it's a beautiful life.
It is. Yeah, it is. Do you know, when I was at the RCA, and I would driving up to London, I'd get off the Elizabeth line and I'd have to walk through Hyde Park. I just used to sort of look up and see the trees and the sky and just keep thinking, wow, you know, how did I get to be here, to be doing this? So, but I know how I got there because of something awful that happened. But, you know, I was just so grateful every time that I was walking through this park and going to college.
Yeah,
So
I listened to a podcast where a guy, I think it was Seth Godin, the marketer, he was saying sometimes you might feel a bit fed up about the work that you have to do, but instead of saying I have to do this, if you can just reframe it and say I get to do this, that automatically makes you feel more positive about things. So even if it's quite a mundane thing, it's still like a bit of a privilege because there'll be far worse things to do. And sometimes that conscious reframing can make all that. It's like, I guess that's why gratitude journals work and that kind of thing, isn't it? If you take the time.
Yeah.
What is the one interesting fact that nobody really knows about Julie Heaton?
Well, again, I think because I wear my heart on my sleeve, I don't think there's very many interesting facts left underneath, you know, sort of rocks and things for people to discover. But I suppose the one thing, which I'm surprised people don't always know, but when I sold my piece of, I don't know if this is relevant, I mean, some people know, but when I sold my piece of work at the summer exhibition, I paid for my BA.
All right.
With money that I made for it. So my BA was about it was not quite as expensive as they are now. But yeah, so I had a piece of textiles that paid for my BA, and that still sort of shocks people when they hear that and they find out. But I wonder how shocked they would have been if I said I sold a painting.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so. God. I mean, that's a whole... I think one day I'm going to have an episode of NeedleXChange where I get a few people together and we thrash that out. I just think the arty crafty debate is just... It's kind of business, you know? It's a bit of show business. It's a bit of smoke and mirrors and stuff. But that principle that you said there, like that portrait of your dad is stunning. And the fact that it's not good enough to go into the portrait gallery is an insult. I wonder if you'd have made it out of, well, I mean, by their token, I suppose, if you'd have made it out of neon tubes, it wouldn't have gone in. You know, I suppose they're being very picked, but maybe they should reframe it as the national, you know, painted portrait. You know, if they, because otherwise, yeah, they're disenfranchising so many other media, aren't they? It's bonkers.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
But, you know, I quite look forward to it because I've got plans to open an art gallery one day, and then I'll just be like, well, I'm just going to do textile art, except I'm going to call it an art gallery. And so it goes. Do you know what I mean? I think the tide is turning. I think this is what we all kind of feel in our bones, don't we?
Yeah, I think the tide is turning as well. So I think, again, it's a good time to be working with textiles. Remember not, I call myself, I mean, I don't even necessarily easily call myself an artist, but I guess I would call myself an artist in that I use textiles to help me say what I want to say. But I also love saying, no, I'm a textile artist as well, because I really like championing, you know, textiles and that medium, and just so people will value it. Yeah. So.
I think respectfully, the fact that you've got an MA from the Royal College of Art, I think I'm afraid that does mean you are an artist. I'm just going to clarify that.
Yeah.
If people want to keep up with you, where do they find you?
On Instagram, I think is the best way to keep up with what I'm doing. So Julie Heaton, artist.
And julieheaton.com, links in the show notes and all that. Hey, Julie, thanks for having a NeedleXChange with me.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to have a conversation as well, Jimmy. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining me on another Needle Exchange. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to email hello@needle.exchange, that's NEEDL.exchange, with any thoughts, comments or feedback. And if you want to keep up with all the news, sign up to the Needle Exchange mailing list at bit.ly/Needle Exchange. See you next time.